Hello, everyone. I am Ritam Agrawal, and here with me,
Is Ken Lewis. Hi.
we are engineers at ID Experience Team. We are responsible to provide you with modern developer tooling. And today, we are here presenting everything you need to know about Apex debuggers. Our forward-looking statement, please make your purchases based on the information which is available publicly. And next slide, please. So today in this session, we'll talk about Salesforce extensions and how Salesforce extension improves the Salesforce development experience. Following that, we'll talk about a bit more about Apex and how debugging with Apex looks like. And then Ken will give us a brief walkthrough of how Replay Debugger works, demonstrating some use cases and differences between breakpoints and checkpoints. And lastly, I'll talk about our two more debuggers that we offer. So let's start. We provide you Salesforce extensions. Salesforce extensions are powerful and optimized way for Salesforce development. And our Salesforce extensions are available to you in VS Code and now also in Code Builder. VS Code stands for Visual Studio Code. It's a lightweight modern IDE provided to you by Microsoft. And if you're interested, you can go online and check their code because it's open source. You can download it to your local development environment. With Salesforce extensions, and another reason we love VS Code is because how customizable it is. Within VS Code, they have Marketplace from where you can download extensions and customize your development experience in IDE. That's where our Salesforce extensions come into play. With Salesforce extension, you can perform basic metadata operations like deploy and retrieve source to and from the org. It offers basic language server features like code completion and intelligence. Salesforce extension pack, it comes with a large set of tools that helps you write, test, refactor, or debug your Apex code. And talking about Apex, what is Apex? Most of you are probably well aware of Apex, but for those who are starting their development recently in platform, Apex is an object-oriented language from Salesforce. It's a proprietary coding language that acts like an interface between your UI and data in the org. It shares features and functionality which is very similar to other languages like Java and C#, and it complements very well with other languages that we develop in platform like LWC. Now, let's understand what is a debugger. Debugger is a computer program that assists in detection and correction of errors in other computer programs. Okay, but why do you need one? So, in order to answer that question, let me take you back half a decade. So prior to 2018, we were used to using this system.debug statements everywhere that would print expressions and variables in your log. And you would need to add it more than you actually need because you don't want to rerun your code. Fast forward to today, we have the capability to navigate around code as we go and examine the values of individual variables and expressions. That's what you would expect from any modern development platform. And we offer you three kinds of debugger: Apex Replay Debugger, Interactive Debugger, and ISV Debugger. We are going to begin with the most commonly used and popular debugger, Apex Replay Debugger. Apex Replay Debugger simulates a live debugging session in VS Code with Apex Debug Log. The most amazing part is it's available to you for free. And it is included with Salesforce extension pack, so no hassle there in using it. And it works with all kinds of org. You can use it with Apex classes, triggers, test classes, anonymous Apex, and save log file. But how do you use it? And Ken, will you help us understand this better?
Yes, thanks for Tom. The replay debugger works by doing a number of steps. These steps are that you need to have code in an org that you're connected to. You need to turn on debug logs for your user in that org. Then you need to create breakpoints or checkpoints in your code at the places that you want to inspect. You need to generate the logs by either running your test or exercising your component or your trigger. Then you need to pull the log that you generated down to your local machine, and then you can replay it and launch it in the debugger. It's just like magic.
Really? That sounds hard. Is there an easier way?
There actually is. So you can do all those steps manually, but if you're in a test or if you're using anonymous Apex, we have a one-click solution that will do all those steps for you in the background. And that's what we're going to show in our demo. But before we begin, I wanted to talk a little bit about breakpoints and checkpoints, because this is unique to debugging in the IDE and debugging with your Salesforce org. So what is the difference between these? A breakpoint is where the debugger stops. This is where you want the debugger to stop and show you everything that's going on at that point in your code, at that point in the transaction. When you're using the replay debugger, these can be modified on the fly. So you can make another one below where you're at in the code to play until that breakpoint. We'll see that in action in the demo. A checkpoint is a little different in that this is a heap dump where the server will give you everything that it has available for that transaction, for all the variables in context at that point in your code. But in order for that to work, the server has to know where those checkpoints are. So we'll see how that works in a minute. This, like I said, this will give you everything available that is in the transaction for the variables in context at that point in time. This really comes in handy when you're using lists, maps, and sets, big collections of data. And these have to be deployed. So the server has to know where these are so that when it gets to that point in the transaction, it can put everything in the log for you. We do have a command that we'll see in action also, update checkpoints in org. So when you create a checkpoint in your IDE in the gutter, you'll want to use this command to tell the server, okay, this is where I have a checkpoint now. In the next log, I need all the information right there. Visually, they look a little bit different. So a breakpoint is a solid red dot in the gutter, and a checkpoint looks a little bit different. It's a red dot with the two horizontal lines across from it, and we'll see that in the demo as well. With that being said, let's switch over and see the one-click replay debugger in action. This way. All right, so here we are in the IDE. I have a project in my IDE, Dreamhouse, and this is one of our sample apps. I also have it deployed to the org that I'm connected to here, a Scratch org that I made for this demo. And right now, I'm a developer. I'm working on tests. We've been working on permissions in our org in this project lately, and we created some new permission sets. And we want to make sure that those permission sets are working as we've planned. So I'm going to open up the Apex test view here with the beacon in the activity bar. And I can see that I have a failing test. So let's inspect this test and see if we can use our one-click debugger to get it green and passing and working. If I right-click here, I can click on this display error context option to open right up to where my error is. So it opened up the file, and then below here in the output, I can see what the error is. It says I have an error on line 15. So let's see what this test is doing. It looks like we are querying the permission set, then we're inserting a test user, we're assigning the permission set to that test user, creating some sample data, and then querying that data and asserting our results down here. But the error is up here where we're trying to insert our test user. So I'm going to put a breakpoint in the gutter there right on line 14, and we'll see if we can step into this method to see what's going on. Now you can launch our one-click replay debugger from a few places. Right above this method, I have a code lens that says debug tests. Above that, on the class, I have another one to debug all the tests. So I'm just using one for this demo, but you can also launch for all the tests in your file if you want. And then also over here in the test view is another icon that you can use to start the debugger for that test. I'll use that one to start debugging this test. Now, when it runs, what it's doing is all those steps that we saw in that previous slide. So when I clicked the code lens there, the IDE turned on the debug logs for my user in the org. It ran my tests, and then it pulled down that log and started parsing it and launched the debugger with it. It played me right through to the first breakpoint that I had set. And now here I am stopped on line 14. So now I'm in a replay debugging session. It's important to remember that the replay debugger is working with that log on your machine locally after the transaction has occurred. It's not stopping things on the server. You're parsing through the log here locally after the transaction happened. Up here, I have my controls for debugging. So I can play to the next breakpoint. I can step over a method if I don't want to step into it and inspect what's going on. I can step into a method, out of a method. I can restart my debugging session, or I can stop it with this control. So I'm going to step into this method here and go see if we can tell what's happening. So it looks like in this method, I am querying a profile and then creating a user. So I'll step over the profile. I'm creating a user, and then I'm returning that user down here. I'm going to put another breakpoint there and just play down to that spot so that I can use the debug panel over here to inspect that variable. And you can see here, I can see all the details for that variable, and I can see that it's a user, but I actually didn't give it an email address. So I'm going to use a snippet that I have configured to set the email address for that user, and I'm going to save and deploy this class again. We'll rerun the test and see if that fixed our problems. So I'm going to stop this debugging session, and then with a command, I will rerun the last Apex test method I ran. I was hoping it would pass, but it looks like it didn't. We might have some more debugging to do. The error is telling me that line 39 is where my issue is. And if you remember, that's where we are asserting the results that we queried. I'm going to step a little bit back from there, though, and see what else is going on. It looks like this is where we're creating those properties. I'm going to put another breakpoint there and step into that method and just make sure everything is as we expected in there. So I'll use the code lens this time, start a new debugging session. And what we should see is once that log is generated and downloaded, it should take me right back to the next checkpoint or breakpoint that I have set. So here I am right back at that breakpoint now. And in the debug panel over here, I can see that that email address is now set for that user. So that should get us past at least that point in our test. That's happening correctly. So let's step through and go down here to the other method that we want to inspect. I'll play down to that point and step into that method. In this method, create properties, it looks like we're working with a collection. We have a list of property objects. We're looping through and adding some records to that collection, but it looks like I forgot to insert those properties. So I'm going to add a line here, and with another snippet, I'm going to insert those properties in this method. I'm going to save and deploy this. And hopefully this will resolve our test. But in order to be sure, I'm going to actually use a checkpoint and inspect where the assert is before I let the test run all the way through. So I'm going to remove my current breakpoints. I'm going to stop this debugging session. I'm going to go back up to that line here. And I'm going to use our command to toggle a checkpoint here, because I want to see everything in that collection. When I toggle the checkpoint, you can see it's probably a little hard to see, but it's one of those red dots with the two black bars in it, so I know it's a checkpoint. And then I'm going to use our command to update those checkpoints in the org. I'm going to make sure the server knows I have a checkpoint at that point in time so that when I run my next debugging session, I'll get everything that it has to spit out at that point. You can see in the output here, I have confirmation that it uploaded my checkpoints. I'm going to go back up and debug this test one more time. Once the log is generated, you can see the little bar moving up there in the debugging panel, meaning it's starting to parse the log. It's starting up our debugging session. And here we are at our checkpoint location. And you can see now in the debug view over here that I have all the records that were queried back, And I have this nice way to drop down and expand and see, even drill down into each member of that collection and see the values for each of the variables that's set there. So this can be really helpful when you're working with lists, maps, and sets. If you don't use checkpoints and you have a bunch of breakpoints, sometimes a collection like this will show up in the debugging pane here just as a string value like this. Sometimes it'll be truncated. It won't have information for all the variables in that collection. But by using a checkpoint, we can make sure that we see all the information that the server knows at that point in time. It looks like I'm getting back the number of records that I expect here. So I'm going to stop this session. I'm going to go back to my testing panel here. And it looks like that debug session, the test actually passed. But I can do that again here just to verify that that test is actually passing now. I can see my output in the bottom. And there we go. So we were able to fix that test with our one-click replay debugger. And we saw how you can use it to go straight to breakpoints in your code. You can see the value for the variables that are in your context up in that debug pane on the left in the sidebar. You can step into, step out of methods, and you can use checkpoints when you want to see all the detail about collections or large variables that you're working with. So that's it for the demo. To summarize what we just saw, when you use the one-click replay debugger from a test or from anonymous Apex, all of these steps are happening in the background. But if you're going to debug, say, live code, a controller that's behind a page or a trigger or something, you can do these steps manually in the IDE. It's just a little easier to get started with the one-click debugger. But what happens is debug logs get turned on for your user. You create and modify your checkpoints and breakpoints. You generate those logs, and then you pull them down to work with them locally. As we saw, though, the one-click debugger gives us a quicker and easier, much more efficient way to do this. So we highly recommend you start debugging by finding a test or creating a test and starting to learn how to go through your debugging sessions this way with this one-click launcher. It's a little easier than remembering the steps to set up the logs and to pull them down. And this way, all that stuff is happening behind the scenes. So you've got the code lenses on tests and an anonymous Apex, and you've got the icon in that testing sidebar where you can launch your debugging sessions from. Now let's hear a little bit more about our premium debugging options.
Thank you, Ken. That was really a good learning session for me, how to use the debugger. And we believe that Apex Replay Debugger caters to most of the debugging use cases for our developers, and we recommend that everyone who's beginning with debugging, they should start here. But we have two more debuggers to offer. And like Ken mentioned, the replay debugger replays through the log and the events has already occurred. So what's the difference? With these two options, interactive and ISV debugger, this works in real time. Like if you have worked with any other language and debuggers and that's what you would expect, to stop and pause events in real time. So interactive debugger and ISV debugger provides you that option. However, due to a multi-tenancy nature of Salesforce orgs, it's very difficult and it's a costly affair to stop events in real time. So that's why these two are our paid option. And talking about interactive debugger, there you have an option to configure exceptions using the command apex debug configure exceptions. Then you can choose from all your exceptions if you have configured any custom exception or from the standard exception like query exception. And then depending on your debugging strategy, you can pick either to always break or never break in those exceptions. Now, last but not the least, talking about our ISV debugger. ISV debugger does everything an interactive debugger does, but it's for ISV developers. This way, they have an access to the logs that we normally won't make available to the customers to protect the proprietary code. And in order to facilitate this functionality, we have a command, create and set a project for ISV debugging. And as the name suggests, what it does, it creates a project and retrieves all metadata and packages information from the subscribers org and allows you to debug interactively with the org. And I just want to say that all these debuggers, they work from VS Code as well as Code Builder. So I hope you have a better debugging sessions. going on forward. And please continue to learn more about our debuggers that we offer. And I would request all of you to take your phones out and scan these QR codes. You have the documentation, and if you want hands-on experience, because there are so much steps involved and there are so many use cases, I definitely recommend you trying out our Trailhead fix and find bugs with Apex Replay Debugger. That will improve your debugging session. And please connect with us, follow us, and using your GitHub issues, give us your feedback, provide your feedback. We are open source, and you can check out our code visiting our extensions repository. And thank you so much for attending this session.
Thank you.